Nice crowd. Wow, really nice. So, right. Hello, and welcome to this evening's Commonwealth Club World Affairs program with Dr. Jennifer Grandis. I'm Katie Hafner. I'm a journalist, and I am the co-creator. I didn't write this, but I am fact-checking it as I go. And I am the co-creator, and host of the Lost Women of Science podcast. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our speaker. Dr. Jennifer R. Grandis, your middle initial, what does the R stand for?
Ruben, my maiden name.
Oh, Ruben, yeah. Right. Not like the sandwich, because there's no E, right?
But I knew him.
Oh, come on. Okay, well,
another talk.
It might be. Bit of a tangent. Is a distinguished professor at the University of California, San Francisco, and an otolaryngologist specializing in head and neck cancer research. Her career has been shaped by both groundbreaking cancer research and firsthand experience navigating the realities of academic medicine. Her new book is Harsh Medicine: Why Women Can't Get Ahead in Science and Healthcare. Welcome, Dr. Grandis, and I can call you Jenny?
Of course.
Wonderful. So I have to say that as I was preparing for this, I've obviously with Lost Women of Science and all the work I've done at the New York Times, doing a lot of work on women, mostly in science, mostly in computer science, I just was reading it thinking, still? Like, really? So I want to do a little bit of, because I always thought, and it might be a bit of a misconception, that women in medicine, that it was better for women in medicine. So what I'd like to do, busted. Okay. All right. I want to start with a little bit of a history of women in medicine.
Sure.
And at Lost Women of Science, what kicked our entire initiative off was this woman, Dorothy Anderson. Does anyone know who that was? No one. Oh wait, who does? Yes.
The woman who described cystic fibrosis.
Exactly. Thank you. I love you. Yeah. So Dorothy Anderson was this woman who she graduated from Johns Hopkins Medical School in 1926. She was one of only 5 women in her class. But Hopkins was well ahead of its time. When Johns Hopkins Medical School opened in 1893, there were 3 women admitted to the first class. Now, I did a little bit of Claude-enabled digging, and Yale Medical School, it turns out, since I know a few of you here went there, was founded in 1810 and admitted women in 1916, so that would be 106 years after its founding, but better than Harvard Medical School, which didn't officially admit its, do you know all this, by the way, Jen?
A little bit.
Okay, you guys might not, well, you might. It didn't officially admit its first women until 1945, 163 years after it was founded in 1782. Then there's UCSF, which my daughter's a doctor, and I was quizzing her today. And I said, how many years do you think after UCSF was founded that it started admitting women? And she said, I don't know, maybe 40. It was 9. I know, right? Good. But Stanford, however, of course, it's a little bit, Stanford's history is a little complicated as a medical school, but when the Stanford trustees formally adopted San Francisco's Cooper Medical College to serve as the university's new medical department, women were included from day one, matching the co-educational mandate established when Stanford University itself opened. So kudos to the West Coast, yeah. But back to Dorothy, quickly. So after Johns Hopkins, she went to Rochester for her internship, and she wanted to become a surgeon. But in that day, we're talking 1920s, women just were not accepted as surgeons. You know all this, obviously. So she became a pathologist, and thank goodness for that, because, women, they weren't sort of patient-facing. It wasn't thought that they should be patient-facing, right? So they were sort of more in the background. You're nodding like you agree with me. Okay, that's a yes.
Yes.
Like in court, could you just verbally say-
Sure.
Okay, so she settled for pathology, and thank goodness she did. So she was working at Columbia University's Babies Hospital, which this person who knows about her probably knew. And back then, in those days, celiac was routinely misdiagnosed as, cystic fibrosis was routinely misdiagnosed as celiac disease. But Dorothy Anderson, who was sort of the epitome of an open mind, was doing an autopsy on a baby who had died, and she saw the lung involvement. And so this has led me to believe that things are a lot better for women in medicine, which then in the last few weeks, that's sort of come crashing down. And I wanted to ask you, I think what we're talking about, and I wanted to ask you, I think the one premise of your book is that, yes, there are, what's the percentage of women graduating from medical school these
At least 50%.
At least 50%. But the glass ceiling enters the picture when it comes to leadership roles. Is that?
That's one of the points. Absolutely.
That's one of the points.
Yeah.
And was that one impetus for the book? Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So the impetus of the book really was finding myself baffled by the challenges of being a woman in science and medicine. Early on, I went to a college that was 50% women, and never occurred to me that I couldn't do anything I wanted to. Medical school was about a third, we're about the same age, about a third of women, and there really wasn't any obstacles to women getting into medical school. If they applied and they were qualified, they were accepted. Mm-hmm. Well, at least in the early 1980s when I went to medical school. The first introduction to it being really not quite right is going into surgery. So I made the choice to go into surgery, and in my internship, it was me and 18 men. And that was a very unusual experience for me. I'd never before been in a situation where I was the only one. And I thought, okay, this is different, but I believe in a meritocracy, and I believe that if I'm excellent, I will pave the way for others. And that really was my approach. And even though people did sometimes awful things to me, I was quite resilient, and I had a lot of support, and I didn't let it really derail me. And so I just kept going.
Was it derogatory comments or sort of sly comments?
Oh my goodness, it was so many things, Katie. So one of the more egregious, and I think I told my daughter about this a while ago. She goes, "You didn't tell anybody?" I'm like, "Who would I tell?" But the chair of surgery, he was new to the institution. I was on his service, and he paged me to come to his office so we could start rounds. And I knocked on the door, and he said, "Come in," and he didn't have any pants on. And I said, "Oh, you're not
like
nothing, like nothing." And I said, "Oh, I don't think you're ready. I'll meet you on the wards."
He said, "I'm ready."
Well, but the point is that it was shocking, but there was no one to talk about it with. I mean, I was the only one.
Horrific.
It is, except it is. Yes, I don't want to defend it, and of course, I don't think anything like that happens today. I think so. Things have really changed substantially. But I wasn't going to let that get in the way of me learning how to be a good clinician, and in that case, a good surgeon. So there were lots of experiences as a trainee because it was uncomfortable for the people that I was training with that I was the only woman. It really, I crashed the boys' club. They were able to do things and behave in ways when I wasn't around that they had to think twice about behaving in those ways when I was around. And so it was awkward from time to time, but ultimately these became my friends. We became, allies and partners. And I think one of the reasons I became a scientist is that it felt so objective. Like it was about peer review. It was about having a great idea. It was about publishing a paper. And really the balance of being a surgeon and being a scientist was absolutely intoxicating. And I think one of the things I didn't appreciate, which is maybe relevant, is that I grew up in this organization. This was the University of Pittsburgh, and people sometimes tried to do bad things to me, but I had acquired so many mentors and allies and sponsors and powerful people. So when people tried to hurt me, there was a more powerful person, always a man, who stepped in and protected me
You
and
say
helped
that,
me.
you say that in the book, and
Yeah.
it's that, in fact, is it's very inspiring.
Yeah,
That often a man stepped in.
absolutely.
So I want to follow through on this idea of academic medicine, and I know there are a lot of
Yeah.
academic medicine here
Yeah.
tonight, but why don't you quickly say how that differs from just a pure clinician?
Oh, absolutely. So, in the world of academic medicine, there really are three important missions. Number one is to practice clinical medicine, which is very similar to our colleagues who are not in academia. But we also train the next generation, whether it be medical students or residents or fellows, and that's a very important part of the mission. And then for me, the really magic was discovery. It was really our job to discover the underpinnings of the diseases that were afflicting our patients, and I became a scientist because my surgeries were not curing my patients with cancer.
Yeah, you write about that. Yeah,
Yeah.
very, very incredibly poignant story that you write about, which I won't describe. It's really deserves to be read. And otolaryngology, is that a male-dominated?
Not anymore. I mean, what's really remarkable is that, half of our faculty and half of our trainees, and we've had many years where all of our trainees have been women. So women are coming into surgery more and more. I could talk a little bit about how I understood that in the beginning when it was really just so few of us. But, what I would say is that the reason I undertook the study, that is the basis of the book, is that I realized that as a role model, I couldn't fix it. That simply being the best I could be, simply being successful in all the objective ways that the community agreed was the right way to be, it wasn't changing it. So I wrote the book because I needed to understand what was happening. And so when I interviewed the people and I listened to them, I was able to acquire a degree of understanding that I hope I can impart in the book.
So my understanding of the genesis of the study was you went to visit Arlie Hochschild in Berkeley,
Yeah.
who's famous for,
Absolutely.
For her book, one of her books called The Second Shift.
Absolutely.
And why don't you describe that?
Sure. So Arlie Russell Hochschild is just a wonderful human being, and we had gone to the same small liberal arts college a few years apart, but I had been connected to her through a fellow alum who actually had befriended her son there. And I came in Pittsburgh, there were very few women in leadership. And I came to UCSF and I thought, it's going to be a completely different ecosystem because as you recounted when we started, women were admitted early on. This is San Francisco, this is the Bay Area. And what I found is there weren't that many and they were suffering. So the women that I met early on, some of them were really struggling to embody their positions of leadership. And I thought, how could this be true? So I started talking to Arlie about, and then I guess there was some documentation of persistent pay inequity, which is something I had worked on early on. And I thought, oh my goodness, so we've known about this pay inequity for decades. Why is it still true? And so she really persuaded me that the way to understand was do a qualitative research study, to adopt her models and go meet people.
Versus quantitative, right?
Yeah.
You had never done a qualitative.
Never.
And but let's define how she defines the second shift.
Yeah. So her work was so important to me when I was trying to be a surgeon, be a scientist, be a mom. And she described essentially the two-job model that really afflicts most women, despite having, parents and a wonderful husband and lots of people to help out. I still found myself really taking on more of the responsibilities to managing the children, the housekeeper, their lives. And this was true for the women in my study early on. I did a study many years ago in otolaryngology, and the women, all 504 of them in the country, they spent an average of 11 hours a week on family matters that the men otolaryngologists.
11 hours more than
the men, exactly.
And we are not surprised.
No, we're not.
We are disappointed, but not surprised. One thing, this is a bit of a digression, but the men do kind of think that they're pulling their weight more, right?
Well, I hate to generalize. What I'd like to say that I'm happy to, but I have to say that I have learned to take responsibility for my own decisions. So we sometimes joke that in our family, he was going to take care of the outside of the house and I was going to take care of the inside of the house. Well, that's not really equal work, but I agreed to that.
Yeah.
And also as a one of the ways I coped with being so busy at work was to be very protective of my roles when it came to the children. I felt I had to delegate some things, like taking them to preschool and picking them up, because that was just impossible in my schedule. But I was determined to be on the board of their preschool and do all these fundraisers. I was determined to, we laugh about, I came to the library every Friday when they went to their school library, because they went to the lab school up the hill from me. And so I'd finish my cases and I'd run up in my scrubs and I was, their mom in the library. But so I did this to myself. In some way. I don't blame everybody else.
But that was your second shift.
It was.
In other words.
It was.
Okay.
It was.
And so you took Arlie's whole concept of the second shift and applied it
Yes.
to your qualitatives.
Yes. Yes.
And walk us through your findings.
Oh my goodness. So it's extraordinary. I learned so much. I thought I understood. It's kind of like, this is my family. I know them. I understand this. And then I met all these people who I didn't know. And I'm like, I think I'm learning something about the world that I've been living in, but I hadn't really seen it. So here's what I learned. I didn't know any of the people that I interviewed. I reached out to them. It was IRB approved email. I was coming to their institutions to be on a board or give a talk.
To be clear, you traveled
all over the country. Yeah. It was before COVID, which was fabulous, because I think today I might have been tempted to do it via Zoom. And I can't tell you how important it was, I think, that I came to their institution, I walked into their office, I got their approval, their consent to participate, and then I just listened. And I turned the tape recorder on, and the conversations, well, the tales they told were just remarkable. So here I would walk, and 50% of my cohort were leaders. They were chairs, they were deans, they were center directors. It was hard to find women in these positions because there was just a paucity of them. And I did this because I wanted to interview people, Katie, who I thought were in positions of responsibility, accountability. So they couldn't just point the fingers over there. So it was really interesting. I'd walk into the room of a woman, and sometimes they just jumped right into it. They had something they wanted to talk about. But more often than not, they'd say, oh, yeah, I know this happens to people. This is right after, the Me Too movement. It was very much in the news. But no, it's not really ever happened to me. But inevitably, over the course of the hour, they would be flooded with memories, and it was remarkable. It was really remarkable, and it felt like it was cathartic.
Really?
It was therapeutic.
As if they were realizing it for the first time as they were talking to her?
Well, they didn't talk to people about this. I'll never forget. So here's an example. I was meeting with a woman dean of a school of medicine in the United States. And she's very anxious when I walk in the room because the CEO of the health system is going to call her. And she keeps calling him her boss, and she's very nervous. And then as we start talking, she starts describing how he has all the power and she doesn't have any power. And he used to have her job. But when he was promoted to his job, he kind of scooped all the power that went with the job and took it with him. And it was so hard to watch her not only be anxious about her current experience, but describe how she felt compelled to leave the institution that she loved because it was clear to her that the person in charge there, the dean there, really didn't value her. So she kind of drew a line in the sand, and he forced her to cross it, and suddenly she's living in this other city in this job that she doesn't really want. And so here's a woman who's in charge, and I just felt her pain and suffering really come through, and it harkened back to many times in her career. So this was typical with the women. Now, the men were to me even more interesting because I hadn't had conversations with my male colleagues about this because it just was awkward. And when I was going through my experiences at UCSF, I could trust very few people with what was happening to me because I was so ashamed of what was happening. I kept wondering, what am I doing that's bringing this on me? Am I behaving in such a way that I deserve this? So what was really wonderful about speaking to the men is, I would say, they were all really decent human beings. There was a basis of commonality and conversation. They were all really dedicated to these really, I think, important missions that we all work in. But the men who had wives or daughters who were in science or medicine, they got it.
They got it.
They got it. But even then, Katie, what was remarkable is they agitated, they would talk about their loved one, and then I'd say, here's an example. A man was talking about how his wife is mansplained in every meeting she goes to, and she can't get a word in edgewise, and somebody's always interrupting her. And I said to him, he's head of a center at a prestigious university. I said, well, when you're running a meeting, how do you manage that? And he said, oh, it's never happened. And he said,
oh my God.
And he said, oh, that can't be true. It must be happening, and I must not be aware of it. And that was really how most of these conversations went. It was sort of, they were having an epiphany about what they weren't seeing that was potentially right in front of them.
There you were, person by person, not just opening their eyes, but you probably helped change behavior.
I don't know.
Do you get emails from people saying, I now do this?
No, one of the really important things that my sociology colleagues at UCSF taught me about this kind of research is you have to promise them confidentiality. And so I don't disclose their names or their institutions. Some of them I've seen, and they've reached out to me and they've
That's what I mean.
touched base. But it's up to them. I don't ever reach out to them, but I have occasionally bumped into people and they'd say, that conversation really was eye-opening for me. So thanks for that.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the main themes. I mean, I'm sure that you heard several sort of recurring things. What would you say the main points people made were as you were visiting them?
I think the main thing was that I came away with is we have to normalize these conversations. I never imagined in my wildest dreams that I would be the poster child for discrimination or harassment. I would have been appalled to think that I would be a person speaking out about this because it would have felt shameful.
Right.
But I have to say, there's a lot of things that happen before one really feels this way. And yet we don't always live and work in a world where we can talk about it. So for example, I gave a talk at a big ENT meeting. I know some of my colleagues are in the audience. This was the Academy talk. And it felt wonderful. It felt really empowering. Maybe 7, 8, 9 months later, I gave a similar talk at a different meeting, but it was a slightly different talk. And a man came up to me after the second talk and he said, the first time I heard you speak, I was really uncomfortable because I was wondering if you were blaming me. And this is a very common reaction, which is important to talk about. Because if someone feels like you're blaming them, it shuts them down. The conversation really can't go anywhere. And he said, but today I could hear it. I could really hear it with open ears. And then I went out to lunch with women who I work with. And I've worked with these women for many years. And I said to them, tell me, have any of you ever experienced anything that Jennifer Grandis talked about? And he said, I heard things that I never, ever knew. And so what I think is we just need to talk to each other about our experiences because we feel, mistreated, but sometimes people aren't seeing, the impact of the mistreatment. We have to talk about it and gut check it and get feedback about it and not wait till it's an absolute crisis because human beings are human beings and we're going to stumble, we're going to make mistakes, and we just have to have compassion and forgiveness for each other, and we can't just kick things down the road until they explode because then everybody's harmed.
We were talking earlier, and you said that the calling a female physician by her first name. Talk about that a little.
Oh, it's so interesting. So we talk about microaggressions. I hate the term because micro is tiny. Like, it doesn't matter, right? But aggression is not good. And what I can tell you is that the accumulation of the microaggressions, it's just exhausting. And so what typically happens is I walk into a patient room. I always introduce myself as Dr. Grandis because I was taught early on that I need to communicate that I'm in charge and that they can trust me and I will take care of them. And it's not unusual for a patient to then call me by my first name. And I never say anything in that setting because it's a very different power dynamic, but I understand that it makes them feel more comfortable if they can bring me on to a different level. But when I am introduced at a national meeting and I am introduced as Jenny, and my male colleague is introduced as Dr. Grandis, I feel like I've been detitled.
So do you step in and say,
Well, I do now. So one of the people I interviewed really helped me understand this. She says, oh yeah, this happened to me last week. And I got up to the microphone. I said, thank you for the introduction. I want everybody to know that I am a physician and a scientist. And, and you can refer to me as Dr. So-and-so. So, but, the hard part is finding the way to do that with grace.
Yes.
And finding a way to do it so you don't shame the person unnecessarily.
Right.
So it requires these conversations, and I don't think it's an easy fix, but we just have to remind ourselves that at the end of the day, they're aggressions, as micro as they may seem.
Yeah, and then, so there's, and a lot of it I think is unconscious, right?
Absolutely.
And speaking of unconscious, so you were on KQED Forumed.
Yeah.
And that phone call that came in, that question that came in, just to describe.
Oh, I love this phone call. So if any of you heard it, a woman called in and she described herself as feeling like she really got it. She was a feminist and she understood the tribulations of women in traditionally male fields. And she was in Spain on a walk, and a fellow walker collapses and a woman runs over to help them. And she runs over too, and she says to the woman, "Are you a nurse?" And the woman says, "No, I'm a doctor." And the woman who called in, she said, "I felt so ashamed that I had made that mistake. And I just feel like we have to have compassion. And the next time, she probably won't make that assumption." But it's
And
it's
even
very
if she
normal.
does, she can, there's still time.
Yeah, always. No expiration. That's another really important point, Katie, that I don't know that I make in the book, but I really want to make it. There's no expiration date for talking about these things. So I had the wonderful experience here with our beloved dean, who is just retired. And he did something in a meeting with me many years ago that was extremely uncomfortable. And I didn't tell him about it at the time because I didn't have the words. And then there was a piece in the New York Times, the Work Friend column, and it really encapsulated the experience.
Really?
And I sent it to him and I said, "I'm so sorry that I didn't say anything at the time, but this is what happened with us and how it made me feel." He wrote back right away and he said, "Please forgive me. Thank you for letting me know. It's just a journey to try to do better." So when things happen to you, it can be really liberating to finally talk about it. There's no expiration date. If you don't have the words in the moment, which is understandable because sometimes we're like, did they just say that? You can go back later and have the conversation.
And how wonderful that he reacted that way. I mean, I'm not surprised knowing him, but
Yeah.
how wonderful that he did.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that intrigued me in the book was your discussion of who it is that women perceive, how they come to perceive what they can achieve and who they can be, and how they get those signals.
Yeah.
And so part of it, of course, is mentorship, and we'll talk about that. But one of them that really struck me, because we did an entire episode on this at Lost Women of Science, is the dude wall.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, we did an entire episode on dude walls, and
Yeah.
I'll just say what that is this whole term dude wall was born at Rockefeller University, where outside its main auditorium there's a wall that's covered, of course, with portraits of scientists from Rockefeller, who've won the Nobel Prize or a major medical prize, and Rachel Maddow was coming to give a talk. Oh, you know about this. She was coming to give a talk, and she's standing there waiting to go in the auditorium, and she turns to her handler and says, "What's with the dude wall?" And so this is absolutely the case. And then these two, that every day you're walking to your classes.
Yeah,
and there's the dude wall.
Yeah.
And so there were these two medical students at Yale who did a study on it. You know about this too?
No.
Oh, good. Something you don't know. So there were these students at Yale Medical School, and they did an entire study on dude walls because what they said, and we interviewed them for this episode, and this is straight from our transcript. One of them said that dude wall immediately for me set the tone of, I need to be on my guard here. Interesting, right? So she avoided the medical school library. She said, I studied at every other, this is on the Yale campus, I studied at every other library other than the medical school library on purpose. And that was a conscious decision because I hated being there and I didn't feel comfortable sitting there and trying to to study and focus with those men literally hanging over my head. And so I think that one thing we could do, right, is change these dude walls, right? I mean, and put up some diversity. But also, it's this idea of what it represents, right? And so they did this. Their study was qualitative, and they said so. Some of the people they interviewed about it said that the portraits were a sign that they did not belong. Others felt that they had no choice but to cope with the dude walls, like get over it. And yet there was a small minority, that expressed fear that changing the portraits might somehow erase an important part of the school's history.
Yeah.
Which I found interesting.
Yeah.
So there is about, like, we can't erase the history. But how do you respond to everything I just said about this?
Well, I thank you for bringing that. It's so important. And my one funny dude wall story, and this is really true. So I was interviewing for a dean position at Hopkins, and I'm having lunch with all the chairs of the departments in the medical school in a room with portraits of men, all on the wall. And the chairs, Julie Fleischlag was absent that day, so all the chairs were men. And they walk in, and they're making fun of the dude wall. And I'm looking at them, and I'm looking at the dude wall. I'm like, it's like
wait,
a mirror,
you,
right? You, right? So what was interesting was they were uncomfortable enough with me in the room to realize there was something wrong. But instead of looking at themselves, they were looking at this up on the wall. So I think again, it highlights how hard it is to say this is a historic injustice. And what am I supposed to do about it? And I think that's a hard question. And what I want to say, because I had a male colleague recently reach out to me and he said, I follow you on social media. And again, I'm wondering, are you blaming me? Are you mad at me? And I said, no, unless you've done something terrible that I don't know about. But we're all responsible. I mean, you're responsible for your own behavior. I'm responsible for my behavior, which Lord knows needs some checking every now and then. But I'm a senior person in this world, in this field, and it's my responsibility to make sure that we behave decently towards each other, that we give everybody the right to advance. And so speaking out is something I think that we need to be a little bit more comfortable doing.
I'd like to, you spend a lot of time talking about motherhood.
Yeah.
And motherhood as a catch-22. So let's talk about, and also what's so interesting is that you say this is a distraction. So let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So what was really interesting is when I interviewed the men and I asked them why didn't they have more women advance. So the data, and hopefully there'll be new data that will be better, but the data shows that when men and women in academic medicine are on par until maybe it gets to the associate professor level. And then there's this big difference in terms of advancement and leadership positions. And so I would see this. I would ask the men about their domains and tell me about the senior women in your unit. And when I said, why aren't there more? And they said, they get married, they have children, they choose. They choose to prioritize. And I thought to myself, that doesn't sound right to me. And so I asked the women, tell me about your experience. And I never heard a woman who was a mother blame anything on their children, blame anything on that role in their life. What they were suffering from is a lack of access to resources and support that they needed to advance. And but it's a catch-22. That's what I mean. You're sort of damned if you do and damned if you don't. And so you just have to do what's right for you.
And one thing you point out, you said that as soon as they have children, their male colleagues assume they aren't serious about their science?
Absolutely. And I can tell you, I was giving a talk on this topic in Germany about a year and a half ago, and I always thought it was better in Europe because of the childcare options and the healthcare options. And the women said it's worse because we take a whole year and there's nothing for us to come back to. They just write us off.
Wow.
So yeah.
I do have a wonderful story, a very uplifting story to tell you, which is that a couple of weeks ago, I went up to Seattle to do an onstage interview with Mary Brunko, who just won the Nobel Prize. I know, amazing, right? And she discovered a gene, and she shared it with two men, but that's okay. And her kid, it was a whole evening of celebrating Mary, or Dr. Branco, excuse me. And her kids, her two wonderful daughters, gave a tribute to her. They came up and gave a tribute to her. And the story that they told me when they gave me a ride home, back to the hotel afterwards, they said that when she won, they didn't even know what she did. And I didn't know how to interpret that, but they said, Mom, they went home and they said, Mom, what do you, what? Like, what? And so she explained it to them. And I thought that was because she sort of, I think she really siloed. I mean, we didn't talk about this, but I think she siloed the work.
Sure.
And really was to them their parent. But then one of them was sitting in class. She's an economics major up at a university in Canada, and the Nobel Prize had just been announced. And the professor said, "This is just a disgrace. There's only one woman who got it this year. And does anyone know who that is?" and Lauren, she's like, but someone else raised their hand and got to answer the question. And I said to her, "You mean you didn't say, wait a minute, it was my mother?" And she said, "No, I'm too shy." And I just think, go everybody. And then so on stage, I said to her, her dress, you got to see this dress. And so she's in Stockholm, she's giving the Nobel speech, the scientific speech, not the award speech. And she has this absolutely gorgeous gown on. And all the men, she's surrounded by a sea of tuxedos. And I said to her on stage, I said, "Let's talk about the dress just a little bit." She said, okay. And I said, it's gorgeous. And B, did you feel triumphant? And she said, "I did." And I thought that was wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, really wonderful. So, in fits and starts, I really do think we're getting there. I mean, so let's talk optimism. Let me just see if I have any more pessimistic questions. No, I don't. So I'd like to talk about, you have a whole section on solutions.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. First of all, mentorship.
Yes, absolutely. It's so important. Actually, I really am optimistic. I'm really hopeful. I firmly believe that we can fix this, just like I think we can fix our democracy, but that's another conversation. But mentorship was amazing to talk about with the interviewees because everybody I interviewed was both a mentor and had been a mentee. So everybody, it's kind of like, well, I'm a child and I'm a parent. I have both of those experiences. And it was mostly positive. So both, if a mentor-mentee dyad were of different genders, they learned from each other. So male mentors learned from their female mentees. Female mentors taught their male mentees. It was really an opportunity to understand the different experiences. But the one thing, Katie, that really was startling is the prevalence of the sexual harassment of the mentees by the mentors. I wasn't prepared for that. I didn't have that experience myself. And I heard it from enough women, and I'm sure there are men who've been sexually harassed by their mentors, I just didn't meet them, that it became a really potent topic because mentoring relationships are private relationships. They're often not witnessed relationships. And it's very difficult because the mentor has a lot more power than the mentee in the institution. And the one really sad story was the one woman who really was encouraged to file a complaint with the Title IX office and advance it through the whole rigorous process. The punishment was he was confused. He was trying to hug you and kiss you like a father.
Oh my gosh.
Right. And he had to write her a letter of apology, but that was it. And she had to stay because there was no other option for her family. And it was pretty clear that her trajectory at that university was forever altered by her determination to come forward. So most people in that situation, the solution is just get out, to finish and get out, because to fight it is really, really difficult.
Okay, on a positive note. About mentorship, what I wanted to ask you is, so if a male is being mentored by a female, what did you do in your interviews? Did you glean things that they learned from a woman that they might not have learned from?
Absolutely. So the men who had female mentors spoke very gratefully about how they showed them work-life balance. These women sometimes were mothers. This is what they had to do to make it work. And so it really helped the man appreciate what went into embodying those two roles. And they shared some of their experiences of discrimination and harassment quite openly, which allowed their male mentee, to understand that what they were experiencing was very different from what he was experiencing, and how he needed, as he advanced in his career, needed to be on the lookout for those kinds of behaviors because they were quite prevalent. So it really opened their eyes to what was happening.
And also just being things about being a leader.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole literature on this, on the way women lead, like the way a woman leads a meeting.
Yeah.
Did that come up?
All the time.
And?
That the same behavior that was valued in a man can often be a vulnerability in a woman. And which makes sense, because we understand that there's gendered expectations in the world, but it makes it hard to tell people how to do things. And so the difference between assertive and aggressive is often in the eyes of the beholder. So the women who were assertive were often judged as being aggressive, and that was a bad thing, as opposed to the men who were viewed as being assertive. So running a meeting was a skill that people talked about and having to learn, except I would say that most men believed instinctively they knew how to do it. And the women talked about how they had to learn how to do it. And particularly the women who identified as introverts, it was much, much more challenging for them to step into a situation and be true to themselves, but also embody a role that was essential for the organization.
One thing I've noticed as an amateur sociologist is that I'll be in a meeting, and the man in the meeting, first of all, there are some interruptions, and they do tend to be more by men. It's just empirically, that's what I've noticed. But also, when a man is, and Carol Gilligan, of course, talks about this a lot, when the man is interrupted, he holds that thought, waiting, not then listening to the person who interrupted him, but waiting to sort of make his point, or so as not to be interrupted, raises his voice.
Exactly.
Oh, you've noticed that
Of course. Which would be very challenging, I think, for a woman to do, to overtalk. So we are sort of socialized. If someone interrupts, we stop and we let them speak. But it sometimes can be very counterproductive.
Yes. So I think my point is that I wonder if women impart those leadership lessons on men when they're mentoring them. I mean, we don't know, but I'm hoping that they do.
Yeah.
I'm cautiously optimistic that they do. So here we're going to turn to some questions. We've got some really great ones. Have you experienced discrimination by other women physicians, especially leaders? If so, why do you think this happens?
Oh, it's such a good question. So I was baffled by this concept. Mostly because there were not a lot of women in my world, when I was training and growing up. So I didn't really have an experience to have to deal with this. But in the interviews, I intentionally explored this, because often I would hear people say, oh, yes, women are harder on other women, was sort of the general phrase. And I would hear the anecdotes and I'd explore them both with the men and with the women. And here's my conclusion. Women are people too, which means we're problematic and complicated. And I do think there is some credence to the idea of the queen bee syndrome. So I can tell you, I got really used to being the only woman in the room. It just was the way it was. And it was uncomfortable. And then I was comfortable with it. And then I thought, oh, maybe I'm special. And so I was aware when I insisted and more women were invited into the room, it was a different experience. And there was a part of me humanly that said, oh, maybe I'm not that special anymore. But of course, luckily I was able to identify it and kind of mitigate it. But I think that happens sometimes. So when someone is used to being the queen bee, if there's other, queen bees wanting to, enter the room, it sometimes can feel like, oh, no, there's only room for one of us, and therefore you can't come in here as well, which is understandable, but also problematic. But I think that the most important thing I decided, because I heard this from so many people, was that when I walk into a room and I see somebody like you, I make an assumption that we have a lot of things in common. And I expect you to be a friend and an ally and a supporter. And if you're not, it hurts. I don't have that same expectation when I walk into a room and it's a man and he has maybe a very different background from mine. And so if and when he's not my friend, it's not such a heartbreak or a disappointment.
Oh, that's interesting.
So as I explored these stories with the people, it really was that there was the expectation that this woman would be my friend, and she behaved like a person who wasn't my friend, and that felt really harmful in a way that it didn't feel when the man behaved that way.
And it makes me think specifically surgery. It's a...
Yeah. Sharp elbows is a term that came up not infrequently. And there is something about, particularly in a really urgent situation, we have to be in charge, and we have to be allowed to be in charge, and we have to have a voice that people can hear and follow. But I heard many stories of women outmanning the men, but it was a catch-22. So one man told me a story of going out after some professional experiences to a strip club, and he was both interested but also kind of shocked that one of the women surgeons came with them. And as he was telling me the story, he even said, but I guess what was she supposed to do? I mean, she was either supposed to go home and not, participate in this professional networking activity.
Oh my God.
Which it was. I mean, honestly, it was. Or she was going to, be rejected. So she was going to be the other no matter what she chose. So he even understood that it wasn't really fair, but it was absolutely, something that was noticeable. It was so interesting. I once wrote an op-ed about, because I heard this many stories where, really important conversations took place while fishing or hunting or on the golf course. And
the golf course.
It is true. And, those of you who in my field, we still have golf outings at our meetings.
And if a man says you just learned how to play golf, I have news for you. It's a really hard game.
Yeah, absolutely. But the story that really stuck with me really poignantly was I was interviewing a woman, very important scientist, really important institution, really great contributions, and she was crying. And I was surprised that she was crying, but the crying had to do with a recent experience where she was ambitious to occupy a certain role. She had this very famous, powerful mentor, and she learned from a younger male colleague who had also been a mentee of this man that he had nominated him to a very important role that she aspired to. And she realized that this was because they golfed together, that they had this, extracurricular relationship that was social, that was sanctioned, but it was also a way for this man to advance in the field where she felt she had no way to do it, that she couldn't avail herself of his patronage because she didn't golf. And even if she did, it's not clear she would have been welcome.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Again, it's not a game to be taken up lightly. These guys, they play. Anyway, enough said about that. Okay, so but one quick thing about the surgery, I have to tell you, and the stress of surgery and being a woman as a surgeon, the wonderful documentary with Nancy Asher, the liver transplant, the famous liver transplant surgeon at UCSF. In the operating room with her husband, also a liver transplant surgeon, John Roberts, and she's like, talk about barking orders. It's almost like, empty the dishwasher, John. Just like, really, I mean, she was so in charge of that. And
Absolutely.
I was just in such awe of how she handled that situation. I mean, maybe not we could talk for a long time about that, but just the way she walked into that operating room, took charge, took absolutely brooked no nonsense from anyone, even her husband, maybe especially her husband, and it was that was eye-opening to me. It was very inspiring in a way.
But the real question, Katie, is what price did she pay? And I'm not going to speak about Nancy's experience, but I can tell you the women's surgeons, Dr. Asher, but the women's surgeons I know who have embodied that phenotype have suffered, have been excluded, have been criticized, have been judged harshly. It's necessary to behave that way in that situation, but there's a price that sometimes is paid, and that's the part that's really unfair.
I can imagine. I can imagine, but I'm so glad I saw that.
Yeah.
So here's a great question, and because I think about this a lot, it's what I call the preaching to the converted question. You've said this book is for institutions, but also the women living this every day, and you've noted men in power often can't see inequities in their own domain. Who do you most want to read this book that you're worried won't, and how do you ensure that they do?
Oh, well, of course I want everybody to read the book, but I really want the men to read this book because I think the experience of a woman reading this book is going to be one of, oh yeah, that happened to me, or I know that happened to somebody else. There'll be a lot of validation and community and sisterhood and a sense of not being alone and maybe getting rid of the shame that is so haunting. But the reason I want our male colleagues to read this book is because it's really important that we help all of us see what's happening around us. And even if, I went through life thinking this isn't true, it's not going to happen to me, and then it did. I'm like, oh, I'm not so special. And the truth is that we're all not so special, and yet we're all really special because the consequences of treating clinicians and scientists in this way is that we all suffer. We need women physicians to care for us, and we need women scientists to discover cures for diseases that will afflict us and our loved ones. And if we're making their life miserable at work, then we are stupid because we need all of their talents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I do hope men read it. I think I'm going to put this by my husband's night. This is a great question. Getting back to the solutions. In Harsh Medicine, you identify a range of structural barriers that prevent women in science and healthcare from reaching positions of leadership, from unequal mentorship and sponsorship to biased promotion practices and exclusion from informal networks of power. We've talked about that. Of these barriers, which do you think institutions need to fix first in order to help women reach more leadership positions? Such a great question.
I think the easiest thing to do is to start measuring. And what I would say is we all believe it's a meritocracy. We're taught that it's a meritocracy, but often it's obscure, it's confusing. Why the story about promotion and tenure was so amazing because I met one man who struggled, and I met so many women. I thought, oh, they're talking to each other, like they're colluding. But they all had the same story. They all were not advanced. They saw a younger man get advanced ahead of them, and they're like, oh, this isn't right. And they figured out how to navigate an incredibly inequitable system. Took an enormous amount of energy. So why don't we decide as an institution, every institution might be different, is what are the metrics that we value? What do we care about? What is the evidence going to be that we're doing better, that we're achieving our objectives when it comes to this? And then start collecting the data. And pretty quickly we'll be able to see where we have gaps. One great example is pay, is that I came from an institution where it was secret to an institution where it's public and nobody died. And the message that I got in Pittsburgh and all these institutions where pay is secret is, oh, no, we cannot make it public. And the reasons never made any sense at all. And here we are at a public institution where all of our salaries are public and the inequities are still there, but they're right in front of us. So we can grapple with them. There's a mandate to grapple with them. So you can't solve a problem you can't see. So what I would say is institutions have to create an atmosphere, a climate where the problems can be made visible. And only then can we start taking steps. And one of the things I love from my UCSF colleagues, I learned about demonstration projects. We're not going to fix it all at once. And more importantly, when we prolong the tenure clock with the intention of advancing women, it didn't work because everybody took advantage of it, more men than women, and the differences still persisted. So let's try different interventions and let's have measurements and see if those interventions work. The interventions that work, let's keep them, let's codify them, and the ones that don't, let's try something else.
I love the idea of measuring. In fact, Nancy Hopkins at MIT,
Yes.
who famously
Yes.
measured her office. She
Yes.
actually took a measuring
She did.
tape and measured her office. And it created this entire chain of events
It
right,
did.
at MIT.
It did.
Yeah.
An amazing thing, though, about that story is I'm an American Cancer Society professor, which is a really cool thing to be. But I was sitting at one of these meetings with a man from another institution, MIT, who was also an ACS professor. And I asked him what the impact of Nancy Hopkins' study was. And he said, that was meaningless. It was, he minimized the study, he minimized the impact, and he's a very famous, powerful person. I thought, oh dear. But these are the things you need to hear in order to have the conversation. So later on, I was able to sort of buttonhole him and say, can we talk about that? I'd like to hear more about your point of view. Because just to live with it and feel like, oh my God, he's a terrible person, because he's not a terrible person.
Wait, you did buttonhole?
Oh, I did.
And what did he say?
And this is a very common theme, when the women were advocating for more space for themselves, he felt left out. He felt like his needs were being deprioritized. I'm not saying it's a fair way to feel, but the truth of the matter is you need to have a meritocracy when it comes to space allocation, and needs to be applied to men and to women. So we're not stuck with the person feeling like, why do we have such an anti-DEI world right now? Because people felt left out. People felt like if we were prioritizing these positions or these resources for persons of color or women, it meant that I wasn't going to get what I needed and I deserved.
And it's the whole anti-affirmative action.
Exactly. We have to be able to talk about it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I hope you continued this conversation with him and pointed out. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Good. So he's
taken care of.
He's good. Grant committees, tenure committees, hospital boards, which of these and other institutional bodies is, in your experience, most resistant to change, and have any surprised you by being more receptive?
It's a really good question. I don't think I have the panoply of experience to be able to compare all of those, but I do think that without an awareness of the biases we all bring to judgments, search committees are a really challenging space, because what I mean is for positions. So search committees are assembled, and in the before times, in the old times, we used to be able to have unconscious bias training. We were subject to conversations about what talent and leadership looked like. I was on some search committees at the NIH where, HR sat in, and when someone said something that belied unconscious bias, they were stopped and that was pointed out. And without that, it's really problematic. So there was a person who was on a search committee, and the finalists was a man and a woman. A man was chairing the search committee, and the person I interviewed said, and the man said, the woman candidate, she's just not warm and fuzzy. And the person thought to herself, oh my God, the man's not warm and fuzzy either, but nobody's talking about that. But in this moment, this man is more powerful in my university than I am. And if I speak out, I'm going to get punished for that. So that comment was left unspoken, unreacted to, at least openly, and the biases continued. So I think that one of the challenges we have right now is figuring out ways to talk about these things. The NIH for a long time did a really good job of making sure that the composition of grant review committees was representative, balanced to gender, school, part of the country, but I don't know anymore. Things have changed. I don't think they've
really?
changed. Yeah.
The NIH, are they around?
They're still around.
They're still a
They're
thing?
still here, yeah.
I mean, all of that. It must be so hard to do. I mean, have you? This just popped into my head, but has anyone studied whether, NIH grants and all of the decimation of what's happening, have women, have female researchers taken a harder hit? Yes.
Yes.
No question. Yeah. No question.
Oh, no question. Yeah.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Well, part of it is what we study. So the whole fields that were demonized, that were just lopped off the top, there is a majority of women investigators in those fields. But that aside, but it was always the case. But I can tell you that the bias in NIH grant applications really came from the institutions. So there's a range of applicants from institutions, but at one point, it was pretty clear that 80% of the R01 grants went to men because 80% of the applicants were men.
I'm sorry, the what?
These are the R01 grants, an independent research grant.
Oh, I see.
The lifeblood of academic investigator. But when I came back to UCSF and I asked our leadership, I said, do we have any idea here? Do we have any idea, what their gender balance is in terms of applications? The answer was no, because we were not collecting that data. So that's what I mean. You can't solve a problem you can't see. So you have to be able to measure it. So you have to be able to collect the data. But here's what I would say at the end. I think that committees where there's no mechanism to discuss comments that are biased is problematic. Because we as human beings bring our biases to work and we're going to say things that reflect those biases, just like we talked about. And it has to be okay, and it has to be challenged, and it has to be corrected. And where there's no dissent brokered, where there's no mechanism to identify it, it becomes really hard.
Yeah. So measure, collect data. Okay, this is a tough one. Can you comment on the very common phenomenon of sexual harassment of women physicians by patients?
Oh, wow. So there was a study in the UK not long ago that reported that 1/3 of female surgeons in the UK were sexually assaulted while they were operating. So just in case we thought this was old news.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. And so I don't know the prevalence. I didn't study it. I didn't measure it. It was not a common question. As I mentioned earlier, there is a dynamic between a physician and a patient where the physician has more power than the patient. I think that in general, many of our interactions with patients are witnessed. So it is unusual, not completely unheard of, but it is not typical, I think, for a woman to be alone with, let's say, a male patient in a room that wouldn't feel safe. But it happens, and because people are people, I'm just not personally aware of the data. I think what happens more often is the feeling of being disrespected. So I heard many stories from women, particularly women of color in my study, that they would walk into a patient room in a hospital and their expertise would not be recognized. And this was true from patients of color as well, patients and their families. To this day.
Yeah.
And what hurt more than anything was the woman would go to her superiors and talk about it, and they didn't care. They minimized it and just basically told her to suck it up. That patient relations was more important than her feeling dismissed as a physician.
And I think I read this in the book or I had a nightmare. That
way to sell the book, Katie.
that a female patient was on the operating table.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, it is in the book.
It is in the book. And the reason this was heartbreaking, so I'm interviewing a woman, she's a surgeon, And she's telling about when she was a medical student. So it's probably 25 years earlier. And she was a medical student, and the patient was on the table, and it was an operation for breast implants. And the plastic surgeons, the men in the room, wanted her opinion about the breasts and wanted her to feel the breasts and tell them what she thought of them. And everybody was really given this opportunity. And she was so ashamed that she participated and that she didn't speak out.
Wait, not for medical reasons. Let's just...
Oh, there was no medical reason for this. This was absolutely abusing an unconscious patient. Yeah. But what was startling to me is that she carried this sense of shame for such a long time, and yet we all understand that in that room, she had no power. She was in no position to call it out or do anything about it. Yeah.
On that note, we're really running out of time. Does anyone have anything positive to say? I've run out of... well, you, Jenny, please.
Well, I want to say something positive. First of all, someone asked me today, would I make the same decision I made again to live this life, to come here, to have this? And the answer is yes, absolutely. I mean, being a physician and a surgeon and a scientist, it's like the greatest gift in the world. I can't believe I've been allowed to do this.
And both our daughters, by the way.
Both our daughters were medical school classmates, and they are doing this, which is just amazing. But the other thing about the experience that brought me to the study, while it was heartbreaking and it was difficult and it was almost ineffable how ashamed I felt, and so many of you know this, it also brought me here. And I never would be here if I hadn't gone through that. So in some strange way, I'm just grateful for it, because we learn so much more about our disappointments and our struggles than we do from our successes. So I'm just really happy to be here, and I hope that together we can just make this world a better place for everybody.
Like what Frank McCourt said, a happy childhood isn't worth having.
Exactly.
Well, that is a positive note. So I would like to thank you, Dr. Jennifer R. Grandis, author of Harsh Medicine, Why Women Can't Get Ahead in Science and Healthcare. And Dr. Grandis will be available to sign books immediately following the program just outside.
Yeah.
Thanks to Wonderfest for being an outreach partner for this program. For information about Commonwealth Club World Affairs membership and upcoming programs, please visit commonwealthclub.org. I'm Katie Hafner. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.